Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Walton and welcome to Quilt Stories. Today we're talking to Sue Bleiweiss, whose quilts are quirky, whimsical and colourful. And I was fascinated with her technique, and so Sue has very graciously agreed to share some of her tips and secrets with us today. Hi Sue.
Hi Lisa, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to do this.
It's something fun to do in this dreadful coronavirus time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a nice distraction.
And so do you want to just tell us where you are?
I am in a little town called Pepperell, Massachusetts in the United States.
Aha, okay, on the East Coast. Here we have some of your quilts, and you don't look very happy in this photo.
Oh. That's my serious quilt face.
It is a very serious quilt face.
I hate having my picture taken. It's, I absolutely hate it. So that's me on a good day, on a good picture day.
Oh, you're smiling now, so that's fine. And would you like to tell us what these two quilts are called?
Yeah, the one on the left is the Treehouse, and the one on the right is called Color My World.
We're going to be talking about a couple of different techniques that Sue uses. So there's always a starting point. Would you like to just talk us through?
Sure, yeah. So every quilt that I make always starts in my sketchbook. I'm a big sketchbook user. And as you can see, my drawing skills are not the best here. So my sketchbooks are filled with very rough ideas, pencil sketches, nothing fancy in my sketchbooks. But they're just a way for me to work through some ideas. They're a way for me to play, test, just sort of test my imagination. It's more like a sandbox for me to play with. But every quilt always starts on the pages of my sketchbook. They start small, little sketches. Sometimes I'll add color, sometimes I won't. It sort of just depends on the mood that I'm in. But most of the time, they're just rough pencil sketches of ideas.
That's really interesting because, there's a whole thing about sketchbooks that some people think that they have to be masterpieces. I've started a few sketchbooks, but I never continue them. But it's great to see that the original sketches don't have to be Van Gogh and masterpieces, and they're just what's coming out of your head, which is really nice.
Right, and they shouldn't be masterpieces. They shouldn't be. My goal in my sketchbook is never a finished result. It's just a place for me, again, to play with ideas. So I'm not looking for perfection in my quilts. And I'm not even looking for an accurate rendition of what the final quilt may end up looking like. I'm just looking to play with some ideas.
Maybe I should pull out some of mine and start sketching.
Yeah. So, and then from my small sketches, I always make a full-size cartoon drawing of the quilt that I think I'm going to make. And sometimes it will change. It's not I'm not necessarily making a full-size pattern to work from my quilts that I'm locked into. I will shift things around. I'll change things. And I don't always add in every single little detail. On these two particular ones, I do have a lot of detail. I don't always do that. You can see on some of the houses in the Color My World one, I didn't put in the windows and that. I don't draw in all those little bitty nitpicky details. But what I'm trying to do here is get an idea of how I'm going to fill the area on the quilt. I always have an idea of what size I'm going to work with. So if it's a 40 by 50 or a 40 by 40 full scale drawing that I'll do. And doing that gives me a way to play with the scale. What looks right on a 2 by 2 inch sketchbook page doesn't necessarily translate when you turn it into 40 by 40.
Fill in the gaps or take things out.
But it at least gives me a roadmap to work from as I start to build the quilt. And like I said, I'm not completely locked into what I draw on that full size, but it's giving me a chance to play with scale and whether or not I need to add more elements or if I'm, too crowded and I need to take things out. But I always do a full size drawing no matter what size quilt I'm making. So, and I save all my drawings. I have every single one from every quilt that I've ever made. So.
Great. So you could make them again if you wanted to.
If I wanted, which I've never done, but you never know.
You never know. I don't ever want to do the same thing again. It's just never the same. Where do you get your inspiration from? Obviously, these are sort of house related and things. are there things that sort of take your fancy? Or
You know, for me, inspiration sort of comes, a lot of it comes from the process itself. You know, I enjoy the process of making the quilts start to finish. I enjoy the fabric dyeing and, you know, all the way through the end. So a lot of it comes from just the process. And then I like to sort of play with words. You know, I like that. I have a whole slew of building and house related quilts. And so the tree house sort of came from that, playing with that house word. So it came from that. And Color My World actually was inspired. I was cleaning out the closet in my studio and I dropped a box of crayons on the floor. And that's where that quilt came from. So, you know, I never know when it's going to strike. So
you mentioned earlier that you've had a bit of a sort of a lack of mojo for quilting, which quite a few of us are having in this time. Is it coming back?
It is coming back. You know, the first 6 months of this year, I haven't been feeling very whimsical. My work is very whimsical and lighthearted and stuff. And, you know, who's feeling whimsical right now, right? So, but it's coming back. I'm actually in process of creating another quilt that I've been working on the last week or so, and it's feeling good. I reconnected with the SACO organization, which has really helped to, you know, inject a little bit of enthusiasm back into the process, and I feel like I'm getting back into it, and it feels good.
Sometimes it just helps to talk to like-minded souls when you're feeling like that, and I know SACO is really good for that, just to talk to people that may be going through exactly the same issues as you. So that's great.
Yeah, I was feeling a little bit disconnected, and now I'm starting to feel that connection again, and it's, you know, it's helping. So
good to hear. So we start with a base layer.
Yeah, so all of my quilts start with 3 layers. I use muslin as my base backing fabric, a layer of wool felt, and a layer of whatever the background is going to be. And my work the last couple of years has pretty much been on white background. So I start with that white background. And from there, and I did want to mention, because I think a lot of people will wonder why I use wool felt and not quilt batting. And the reason I do that is the wool felt, and the wool felt that I use is a 65-35 wool rayon blend. And I use that because it gives my quilts nice body. They hang nice and flat, especially my really large quilts. Quilt batting is great, but it adds loft, and I'm not looking for loft. I'm looking for body. So that's why I use the wool felt instead of quilt batting. So I'll fuse all those layers together with Misty Fuse, and then I will quilt. I usually will randomly quilt the background, but in the case of the treehouse quilt, my approach was a little bit different here. What I did was I drew the design, the main elements of the quilt onto the white fabric. I wanted my quilting stitches not to be random across the background, the white background. I wanted the tree trunk to have texture, and I wanted the bodies of the houses and the roofs and stuff to be quilted in such a way that they would stand out a little bit more and not look like it was just quilting in the background. So I approached the treehouse background quilting a little bit differently than I typically do.
That's interesting. It's just quite different to the way people usually work. So.
Right. Yeah. Typically people will make the whole quilt and then do the quilting, but I quilt in layers because I don't like to have to quilt around things. So yeah, okay. I know I'm a lazy quilter. What can I say?
No, look, I have spoken to quite a few quilters in this series, and those that do the thousands and thousands of starts and stops, I have great admiration for, because like I'm a lazy quilter, and if I can get away with not doing it, I will. You just briefly mentioned that you actually fused your 3 layers together. Do you do it in sheets of Misty Fuse, or do you cut it up into little bits and sprinkle them on?
Depends on how big how big the base is that I'm working with. If it's a really, really big base, then I'll actually do sheets, because I don't want any shifting. And so the Misty Fuse keeps everything, you know, where it's supposed to be. Yeah. And so,
but I do as well. And you don't find that it's too thick or too stiff, or is that
not at all? You know, by the time, and which is why I use the Misty Fuse, because by the time I end up quilting over those black lines that we'll talk about in a bit, you know, I can be stitching through half a dozen or more layers of fabrics all fused together and with no problem at all.
So here we have some of your shapes. I'd like to talk briefly about your fabric that you do and also your black lines, which you're famous for. So first up, your fabric, which we're going to see a little bit later because we've got some shots of your studio, which I think you might have tidied up especially for me, the photos, because it looks really tidy. So first up, just let's talk about your fabric that you use.
Okay, so this is the treehouse. These are close-ups of the treehouse, and so the fabric here is the white base fabric that you're seeing, which I get from a company called Test Fabrics. It's a really nice tight woven fabric that I use for all my colored fabric because I dye on my own and all my black. And so what you're seeing here is a close-up of the quilting stitches. You can see I use the shape to guide how I quilted the particular shapes. And the yellow and the orange that you're seeing there, that's my hand-dyed fabric.
Even the black, because black is really hard to dye.
Yeah, even black. And the reason I dye my own black, originally when I first started making quilts, I didn't dye my own black. I bought a black. The problem was that the weave structure was a little different. It was a little looser than all of the other fabrics that I was using because I was using this tightly woven white fabric for the rest of it. And so when I stood back from the quilt, I could tell that black fabric wasn't the same as the rest of the fabrics on the quilt, and it drove me bananas. So I started dyeing my own. And what I do is I want a nice, rich, really rich black. So I dye it twice. It goes through the dye cycle, start to finish. Mm-hmm. And when it comes out of the dye pot, it's rinsed and washed. And then I re-dye it again. It goes through the whole cycle again. And that's how I get a nice, deep, rich, consistent black. And the benefit of doing it that way is I get the nice, rich black. But also, when you look up close to at my quilts, those black lines, it's all raw edge. And because I'm using that nice tight weave, mm-hmm. I don't get, in the Misty Fuse, I don't get any fraying that I would typically get with a purchased black that may have a looser weave on it. So
now the lines, I used to think they were all beautifully even, but now I'm looking at the black lines, I'm looking at the chimneys and things. It looks like it's freehand cut, is it?
Yeah, it is. I freehand cut them all, either with a rotary cutter or scissors. It depends on how long the strips are going to be. And I don't measure anything because I don't want the lines to be the same, because then if one is off, then it would stand out. And I like that, I like the unevenness of it. It adds to the look that I'm going for. I want my quilts to be lighthearted and whimsical. I want them to make you smile, and I want you to feel good when you look at them. And so I want that wonkiness. I want that unevenness. So I don't measure anything, and I don't cut them on the bias. I don't worry about it.
It seems to be that something small like that, in that you just do it freehand, it does really add to the quirkiness of it, because it looks like a pencil drawn or a crayon drawn. Definitely. And it's just
I want that black line to look like a sketched line that you would draw in your sketchbook really quick. That's the feeling that I want you to feel when you look at it.
And do you then stitch just down the center of it?
I do. After the last step of all my quilts is to stitch down the center of all the black lines. Just a straight stitch, black thread through the center of every single black line.
It actually, the last photo was very clear, the fact that you mentioned before with the quilting done and then adding the black lines. So I can see why you would do that. I think that's quite clever. So the colored shapes, the leaves, the clothes, they're just cut out freehand, put on, and then the black lines just turn it into a cartoon.
Exactly. Yeah. So for the color, my world quilt, I approached that a little bit differently. I didn't do the tracing on the white background. I just randomly quilted the entire white background as it was. I didn't bother to pre-draw any of the lines. I wasn't worried about it because I knew there was going to be lots of imagery on there, and I wasn't entirely sure. I knew I was going to make some changes to the drawing as I was going. So it was a little bit more organic. I just quilted the background and then laid down all the imagery on top.
It's a very brave move.
Yeah, well, it worked, I think.
Yeah. So as you said, you've added the imagery. So there's a couple of stages here. You've got the black lines, followed your sketch from your sketchbook and put them in.
Right. I used the full-size drawing as a, sort of a roadmap to get me here. And if you look back, if you remember on the original, the full-size drawing, it looked
Yeah.
a little bit differently. There were no clouds in the sky, and I had the words "Color My World"
Yes.
at the top. And that's what I mean when I say, the drawing that I do, I'm not really married to that. I will make changes as I go if something doesn't feel right, or if, I might head into a different direction. I'm not locked into that drawing.
Right.
I like a little bit of organicness to the process. I don't lock myself into anything.
It's a good way to work, I would think.
It worked for me. So some people, they like to be exact to the original drawings, but I don't. That's kind of not my style.
A little bit of detail about how you made the crayons.
Yeah. So the crayons, I wanted them to have color, and I wanted them to have the names of the colors on the crayons, but hand cutting those little letters was not yielding very good results. So I took a different approach, and I drew them and then scanned them into the computer, added the color, and then printed them onto my fabric, and
Okay.
then come out and outline them with the black, and then fused them in place. And that worked much better. I did hand cut the word crayons.
Mm.
Those were hand cut, but they were bigger, so they were easier to hand cut.
Yeah, it's clever. I mean, it's a combination of different techniques. Some things that you've been doing for ages just suddenly aren't what you want them to be. I think one of the things that I enjoy most about quilt making is the problem solving. I think what you've done with the lettering there is you had a goal, but you weren't quite sure how to do it, and you sort of came up with a good option, and it worked really well. Flick, we've got a few photos of your studio, as I said, looking extraordinarily tidy.
It doesn't look like that right now, so.
So I can see some of your quirky, more colourful, I guess, quilts, the small ones. They were earlier ones when you were using more colour in the background.
Yeah, when I first started doing this, I tended to work all color, start to finish, and in the last couple of years, I've sort of moved away from that, and now it's more black and white with a spot of color here or there, or the white background. I think it makes the colors pop a little bit more. So, yeah, that's my ironing station, and underneath there's storage in the base of that. And this is my office area. I'm in the attic, so the room is long and sort of narrow. And so one side of it is my office area, where it's, my computer and all of that good stuff. And then the other end of it is my sewing machine, and the ironing surface and stuff that you just saw is at the other end.
I love your coat. I remember seeing that being created on your Facebook or social media somewhere, and that's really beautiful. Do you wear it much?
I don't. It's too big. But I love it. So it sits in my studio where I can see it all the time. But then that was another great example of my sort of playing with the word house. I got this image in my head of the word house coat, and it was off and running with it. So it was fun to do, but it's too big. So then I'd have to part with it though.
Oh,
So.
1 or 2 threads. I do like a mass of threads.
Those are my color thread collection. And then on the other wall, there's a window to the left of that. And then there's another wall on the other side. And I have all my neutrals, my blacks, whites, browns, threads are on that other rack. So it makes it easy for me to find what I'm looking for.
We have a long arm, and we have a Bernina. Looks like the same one I've got. A nice big table at the back, so you can spread out and takes the weight. And that's a baby lock.
Yeah, the baby lock coronet.
You're using it as a sit-down machine?
I do. Well, I can either sit or stand at it. It depends on, what I'm quilting and how I'm feeling. But sometimes I'll sit, sometimes I'll stand.
Okay.
So I added that in the studio last year. I absolutely love it.
Yes, when you get a good machine like that, it just sort of really helps your workflow, doesn't it? It's sort of like, yes.
I'm kicking myself for not adding it sooner.
Oh, well, Now you've got one. This is your wet studio, I believe.
Yeah, I have in the basement. Up here in the dry studio, I have no access to water. Like I said, we're in the attic. And I've also got carpeting on the floor, so I can't do any wet process stuff up here. So in our basement, we have a separate room and have my dye studio. I added the stainless steel sink. It has a dedicated washing machine down there, so I don't have to, you know, drag the wet, dripping, dyed fabrics up the stairs. And all my wet stuff, all my wet processes and things get done in the basement. Got a concrete floor, so I don't have to worry about splashing, and it's great.
Now, this is another side of you that I was really interested in. You are doing a lot of photography now.
A lot of wildlife photography. Yeah, I started doing it. It's probably been, let's see, 5 or 6 years. I mean, I've always photographed my own quilts and artwork and stuff. And in fact, in my first book, I did all the photography for my first book. But it's always been just artwork and stuff. And when we moved to this house that we're in now, we're right along the Nashua River, and we bought a canoe, and we took the canoe out, and I think we were out for maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, and we came across a great blue heron, and I was maybe 30 feet from it, and I was absolutely entranced. And so the next time we went out, I brought my camera, and it just sort of went from there. And it's really become quite a passion for me. I'm really enjoying it. I spend a lot of time outdoors photographing birds, especially, are my favorite subject. So
they're beautiful. You can check out more of Sue's photos on her website and her blog. The links will all be in the information section. And I do encourage you to go and check them out, because these are just two that I grabbed, but was like, oh, they're beautiful. There's one of a feather that's just magnificent, just sitting there on top of the water. So that was fascinating, Sue. I can see maybe some birds appearing in some of your quilts in the future. That sort of crossover sometimes is slow to happen, and then one day I suspect there's going to be a few new motifs in your quilting work as well. I think your photography is sublime. I really like it. If you've enjoyed this video, please click the share button and the subscribe button and all that stuff down the bottom. So I'm encouraged to make lots more videos. And it's been delightful chatting with you, and I look forward to seeing your future work.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun to do. Thanks for asking me to do it.
My pleasure. Okay, everybody. See you next time. Bye for now.